Hello and good day to everyone. Welcome to our lecture for the day, which is entitled Historical Antecedents of Science and Technology. And in this lecture, we will trace the history of science and technology in the Philippines, specifically its economic, political, and social events that shape its development. Had start during the early years of the Spanish colonialization from the 1869 to 1898. And the Spanish colonialists did not only bring their religion, their culture, trade, and commerce, but they also brought knowledge with regards to science and technology. And that is made possible by the opening of the Suez Canal that shortened the route from the Philippines to Europe. So if you look at the map, instead of traveling or encircling the continent of Africa and into Asia, the route was made shortened by creating a canal here in Egypt. So this country here, so they created a canal here, and so it shortened the traveling period of the Spanish galleons, so from Spain to the Philippines. Period, some of the Filipino scientists are mostly interested in animal and plant systems. And the following are some of those Filipino scientists. We have Father Ignacio Mercado, Dr. Trinidad Pardo de Tavera, and then Dr. Leon Maria Guerrero in botany. We have Anaclito de Rosario in chemistry, and Dr. Manuel Guerrero, Dr. Jose Montes, and Dr. El Rodario Mercado in the field of medicine. During the early years of the Spanish period, galleon trade was the chief economic activity because the Spanish officials would prefer this due to its big profits. During the early years of the American occupation, the Sherman Commission established the first free public educational system in our country, while the Taft Commission started the gradual Philippinization of the government. In 1901, the public school system was established, and during this period, the Insular Bureau of Agriculture and Bureau of Government Laboratories were established, which principally conducts biological, chemical, and scientific studies. During this period as well, the Philippine Commission was expanded, and for the first time, it includes a Filipino scientist, namely Dr. Trinidad Pardo de Tavera. In 1905, the Bureau of Government Laboratories was reorganized into the Bureau of Science, and it undertakes all fields of sciences, and it produces quality research work and is being published in the Philippine Journal Science. In the same year, the Bureau of Science was made the custodian of the international standards of weights and measurements. By 1908, the University of the Philippines was established, and it was then followed by the College of Agriculture in Los Baños. When the Jones Law was enacted, which replaces the Philippine Commission with the House of Representatives fully composed of Filipinos, it began the downtrend for the Bureau of Science. So the Bureau of Science was transferred to the Department of Agriculture and Natural Resources, and it shifted its emphasis from health and sanitation to the study of the country's natural resources. Growth of science during this period was slowed down because it led to the decreased number of articles published in the Philippine Journal of Science, and most importantly, all those published articles are poor in quality. After that, the country also experienced the world recession in the 1930s, which caused further losses to the Bureau, which resulted to the retrenchment, loss of several divisions, reduced budget, and brain drain. In the years 1933 to 1934, a general reorganization took place. The DNR became the Department of Agriculture and Commerce. The Bureau of Agriculture was split into the Bureau of Plants and Bureau of Animal Industry. The Division of Mineral Resources was converted into the Bureau of Mines, and then the Bureau of Science lost some of its divisions. During this period as well, the Bureau of Science main thrust was on public health and nutrition. This is because of the outbreak of the cholera, smallpox, dysentery. Also, during this time, research and uses of agricultural products, medicinal plants was common, and it was led by Eduardo Quisumbing. Isolation and elucidation of natural products was led by Alfredo Santos, and then essential oils used as food flavors and fragrances was led by Luz Olivares Bernard Belardo. And then for coconut as a renewable resource of fuel was led by Julius Vanson. Meanwhile, the College of Agricultural's focus is on improving the breed of basic crops, livestock, and poultry. So a varietal introduction, evaluation, and inheritance in rice, corn, sugarcane, coconut, abaca, and tobacco. It also focuses on the improving the breed, feed ration, and the quality of meats and eggs, which was led by Dr. Francisco Fronda, which was named the father of the poultry industry in the Philippines because of his 500 scientific articles during his lifetime. During the early years or the war years of 1941 to 1945, also known as the World War II, Manuel Quezon was the president when the war between Japan and the US erupted. During this year, we were confronted with a very poor economy and a productive period in the research life of the Bureau of Science. During this year, a few nationalized scientists directed their efforts to food processing, such as the processing of tuyo and vinegar, and then coconut was converted into cocoa jam and coking oil. After World War II, during the rehabilitation and reconstruction period from 1945 to 1948, Manuel Rojas became the first president of the Republic, and his focus in order to rebuild the economy is industrialization, people participation in the government, closer cooperation with the United States, and the restoration of peace and justice. He was also the one who enacted the Bell Trade Relations Act between the United States and the Philippines. And under this trade, the Americans have the right to dispose, exploit, develop, and utilize all agricultural, timber, and mineral lands of the country, which is a disadvantageous one to our country. During this period also, the Bureau of Science was converted into the Institute of Science and was placed under the office of the President. Under the President's guidance, all scientific efforts was redirected to industrialization. That's why Filipino scientists at that time focused their efforts towards solving problems like big shortage of food and fuel and public health. One example to that is the conversion of coconut oil into ethyl alcohol, the fermentation of cassava, and indigenous raw materials and recycled food waste were used as animal feed. During Roa's regime, the gradual Philippinization of the government resulted in several negative effects on the development of science in the country. One, the reorganization led to the loss of records because there's no clear understanding of the rules and functions of different offices. The second one, there was rampant graft corruption and efficiency of the government due to unqualified officials. And lastly, the budget for the Bureau of Science for its research and secret scientific activities was at the mercy of its department secretary, which is operating with a low budget that led to the Bureau soliciting foreign aid and through scientific projects. Under the Quirino administration, the president desperately sought the help of the United States. And with President Truman proposing an economic survey mission called the Bell Mission, the United States provided the Philippines with $250 million in aid to fund its science and technology pursuits. During that period as well, the Institute of Science was renamed the Institute of Science and Technology. Under Quirino's rule, the Philippine economy flourished, crop production increased by 100% from 1946 to 1956. The livestock and poultry production likewise improved, and the demands for lumber and timber greatly increased due to rehabilitation and reconstruction programs. After Quirino's administration comes the Magsaysay administration from 1953 to 1947. During Ramon Magsaysay's rule, he directed all efforts to the upliftment of rural people, improve the land reform system, provide easy term credit and facilities, constructed roads and buildings for the masses, provided technical advice for farmers on farm management and intensive development, and extended the duty-free trade under the Bell Trade Act. In result, the highest number of scientists as well as scientific work occurred in 1956. And also due to RA 1237, it granted special privileges to scientists and investors. Discoro O'Malley organized the Division of Plant Breeding, Philippine Seed Board, the National Rice and Corn Cooperative Movement Program. Also, Ford Fonda continued to improve the poultry industry by introducing modern techniques. The good run for science and technology continued under the Garcia administration from 1957 to 1961. Under Garcia, he adopted the Filipino First policy, and he replaced the National Science Board into the National Science Development Board and raised it to a department level with a budget of its own. Scientific and industrial researches were made possible, especially on indigenous materials, improvement of industrial products, and substitution of native raw materials. During that administration, 1959 was called the crop year. It increased production despite the prolonged drought. An offshoot of agricultural research breakthroughs also happened, and it included the improvement of farm technology and the use of modern farm practices. But that good run was derailed under the Macapagal administration. He instituted the full decontrol program, which lifted all government controls on foreign exchange, and that led to the depletion of the country's foreign reserves. So funding for science and technology was greatly affected. It ended the protection of Filipino enterprises, unlimited importation, and Filipino colonial mentality of buying stateside goods caused a substantial drop in sales of Philippine-made commodities. Under Macapagal's administration, the NSDB was mandated in 1963 to undertake research all fields through its two commissions, the National Institute of Science and Technology and the Philippine Atomic Energy Commission. The Scientific Instrumentation Division was added to the NSDB, which shifted its efforts to extensive training and expansion. The International Rice Research Institute was established in 1960, was also under the Macapagal administration. After the Macapagal administration comes the Marcos era pre-martial law from 1965 to 1971. Under President Marcos, the national goal emphasized economic and rural development, self-sufficiency in rice and diversification of crops, land reform program, and intensification of community development programs, and laws that adjusted the government's buying price for rice and corn, and lastly, reorganized agricultural agencies to reduce operational costs and attain efficiency. After the martial law or the after martial law era, when President Marcos lifted martial law under Proclamation 2045, the NSDB was drafted a comprehensive science and technology plan for the country, or the 5-year Science and Technology Development Plan. Also during this period, the NSDB was reorganized to the National Science and Technology Authority. The NSTA also initiated the creation of the following agencies. First, we have the Philippine Council for Agriculture and Resource Research and Development, or the PICARD, the National Research Council of the Philippines, or NRCP, the Philippine Council for Health Research and Development, and lastly, the Philippine Council for Industry and Energy Research Development, or the PCERD. All these agencies are as of today still existing and functioning their mandated roles and responsibilities. Under the NSTA, or the National Science and Technology Authority, it tackled three major issues. First is the collection of biological specimens, the state of the dairy industry, and lastly, the effects of radiation on human health. Lastly, after the Marcos era comes the post-EDSA revolution period, and it all started under Corazon Aquino's administration, where she inherited a serious economic crisis that led to the lowest point for science and technology. Under her administration, she organized the Philippine Commission on Good Government and the Commission on Human Rights. During her administration, the NSTA was also reorganized into the Department of Science and Technology, and up to date, it is still the name of that agency. Pag-asa was also transferred to the governance under the USC from the Department of National Defense. Next to Aquino's administration comes Fidel V. Ramos' administration. And under his administration, he created a task force on science and technology development in 1989. This task force was tasked to have a dialogue with industry and agriculture in order to identify the science and technology areas needed for the country to be a newly industrializing country by the year 2000. But sadly, these have not yet been realized even today. Under Fidel V. Ramos, once again, he envisioned the Philippines to be a country where all are provided a better life. And then the DOST refocused its efforts on the 15 leading edges or sectors that have substantial contribution to our gross national product. It includes agriculture, aquaculture, marine fisheries, forest and natural resources, metals and engineering, textile industry, mining and minerals, process industry, etc. And so, those are the history of our science and technology here in the Philippines. Thank you for listening.